Usually
We
our
have enough right
hotels,
now. It's coming right here.
but we'd
About
have
2
a
minutes.
blow-off big dinner on Halloween, Valentine's Day night. Like, we just go for 3 nights like a jet setter, you know, split over to Paris.
We're just gonna flit over for a couple.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, you can do that when you have the miles.
If you save up all those miles.
Absolutely. And I made this trip on frequent flyer miles too, so.
For you.
That's right, follow the pattern.
That's right.
Bill, do you need signatures on this,
That's kind of unusual.
since it's not financed? You know, from everybody, or?
The two of you?
The two of us?
Both of you. How about that?
Half of you.
So it's very important.
As you can tell by our half of the room that's empty.
You're the chair, you get double credit.
For credit cards or for the?
This shouldn't take
So
too long.
I got 728. You have the same?
I have 729 actually.
Oh, okay. Well,
So we're close.
yes.
They both say credit cards, they just use, number 9, I'm sorry. There's 3 or. So, what's the addition for?
Let me know when it's 7:30. Mine is maybe a little bit behind, so.
8 cents. Lakeside.
I got 729 now.
Bills
Okay.
have to come out of the.
I guess difference of few seconds here.
Recommended. But they, to us.
All right.
We doing?
Well, it's 7:30, and I'm going to call the meeting of the Middleton Common Council for July 3rd, 2018 to order. So the first item on the agenda is the roll call.
Alderperson Burke,
Here.
Alderperson Olson,
Here.
Alderperson Sullivan,
Here.
Alderperson Kuhn,
Here.
Alderperson Ramsey,
Here.
Alderperson West,
Present.
and Alderpersons Richard and Teal are absent and excused.
Well, the next item is the comments from the citizens present, limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and we need somebody to speak for at least 2 minutes so that we can have a public hearings. That's at 7:32. Mike, you have something to say? I know you got a lot to say about jail.
to say about Joe Kranz. Is it time to say that now?
Well, could
Yes.
be,
Well, let's
yeah.
don't
You
split
can
it
say
up.
now, and you can also say later. Well, it's.
We could move up the proclamation so she doesn't have to stay around for.
Oh, okay. All right. So we can go to the proclamation here. So you want to say anything to begin with? Should I start with the proclamation?
You probably should read the proclamation and then I'll make some comments and we have a presentation.
Okay. Well, the proclamation is honoring Jill Kranz for her exceptional career of public service and declaring Jill Kranz Day in Middleton, which is August 16, 2018. So it's well ahead of our time so that we can remind people that there's a Jill Kranz Day. Whereas in her 32 years as a senior center director, Jill Kranz has been an exemplary model of public servant. And whereas Jill is right over there, if you want to stand up, that's fine. So for the past 17 years, Jill has managed the current Middleton Senior Center with aplomb, staying up on top of maintenance and budgeting issues while expanding services to seniors and keeping a very pleasant, service-oriented attitude to the center, the accomplished staff, and whereas through Jill's tireless work, she has overseen an expansion in senior center programs to include important intergenerational programs like Memory Cafe and Breakfast for Your Brain, and we could all use that one. So, and the establishment of the medical equipment loan closet, and whereas because of jail's initiative, the Meals on Wheels program is a well-run and effective service, and it helps lots of people in Middleton here. And even, I guess, even our police chief, he delivers some of the Meals on Wheels as well. Oh, Aline Kelly, awesome, that's wonderful. Whereas through Jill's guidance, the senior center volunteer base has grown to over 350 strong. And whereas under Jill's leadership, Middleton became the first city in Dane County area to receive the dementia-friendly designation. And whereas Jill's stewardship of the senior center has led to both state and national acclaim, with the senior center receiving state accreditation by the Wisconsin Institute of Senior Centers since 1994. We may have been the first one. And having received the National Institute of Senior Center accreditation since 2004, and I was involved with some of the later ones. And whereas evidence of Jill's extraordinary tenure is demonstrated by her receiving the Founders Award from the National Institute of Senior Centers, the highest honor in the profession. She just came back from getting that award. The Founders Award is bestowed upon an individual recognized for outstanding professional leadership in the senior center field and for enhancing the senior center profession and National Institute of Senior Centers. And whereas Jill has always been willing to give back and help other communities achieve similar success. And that says a lot about her. Having devoted served as a delegate, officer, and currently as a peer reviewer for National Institute of Senior Centers. Now, therefore, the city, its mayor, past and present, she has worked with 4 mayors, starting with Dan Ramsey, Doug Swank, and Kurt Zonentag, and of course now. So, and the Middleton Common Council honor Jill Kranz with the declaration of Jill Kranz Day in Middleton on August 16, 2018, when we will be celebrating Jill's career with a retirement party from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Senior Center. Mark your calendar, folks. We wish Jill a happy, healthy, and fulfilling retirement. So let's give Jill a big hand and
Come on up here, Jill.
Jill is simply amazing. Do we give her this now, Michael?
Yes, we do.
All right.
And then we take a picture of her with all of you.
There you go.
Yes. And this is the Founders Award that Jill
Nice.
brought back from Charleston, South Carolina, from the National Institute of Senior Centers. But what I wanted to mention to all of you was I was at a state conference of my peers recently, and this isn't the first time, but one of my peers came up and said, I heard that Middleton has the leading senior center in the state of Wisconsin. I said, you're right, we do. And Jill Kranz has been there for 32 years, and we've been very fortunate to benefit from her leadership, her vision, her know-how, and her personality in bringing out the best in people and collaborating, and 350 volunteers. You know, and sure, Sandy Whitty, our volunteer coordinator, gets a lot of credit for that, but it is the tenor of the center itself, and you get a lot of credit for that. And, you know, from where the senior center was before at the depot, in a very crowded space, to a space that immediately became filled with activity, programs, and creative people. So Jill, congratulations. We're so proud of you and for the representation for our community in the nation as well as the state of Wisconsin. Let's get a picture. If we could get the council standing behind Jill, that would be awesome.
In front here?
Yes.
In front?
Everybody smiling? Wonderful. Great, not a bad looking face in the group. Sorry. So that's Thursday, August 16th. It's going to be a big party.
Hooray!
Senior Center from 3 to 5 o'clock. And by the way, Jill's husband of many years, I don't know how many, Bob Kranz is back here as well. So, Bob, stand up and take a bow.
Go ahead and stand up, Bob.
I've been married to Bob for 31 years.
There we go.
More attached to the senior center than I am. So thank you very much. I just need to say, as Mike said, the staff we have and the programs we have, people often say are reflective of me. But what we're able to do and what I'm able to do is reflective of you as a city council in a city. Because without your support of the older adults in this community and the senior center and the programs and the progressive things that we're able to do, none of these accolades for me would be possible. So you have to give yourself a lot of credit because for close to 50 years, the city of Middleton has supported older adult services in a really grand way. So thank you to all of you. You made my job easy and fun, and it's been a great ride.
Bravo.
So.
Okay, now we move on to the public hearing part at 7:32, and I'm going to open the first public hearing for Peachtree Hospitality Management LLC, doing business as Stay Bridge Suites and requesting Class B fermented malt beverage and Class C wine license, and they're located at 7790 Elmwood Avenue in Middleton. Anybody who wants to speak either in favor or against or hold their peace? All right, there's nobody who wants to speak, so I'm going to close that part of the public hearing, and we move on to the second part of second public hearing. This is the Capital Ice Arena LLC, doing business as Capital Ice Arena, and they are requesting a Class B fermented malt beverage and Class B intoxicating reserve liquor license located at 2616 Pleasant View Road in Middleton, Wisconsin. Anybody who wants to speak for or against this one here, that they shouldn't get the license? Well, if there's no one who wants to speak, I'm going to close that part of the public hearing, and we go to the approval of the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as listed here.
Second.
Okay.
One question. Can we do the audit of the bills since finance didn't meet?
It's the recommended by the Finance Committee, and you
Finance Committee didn't
Actually,
meet.
no, the agenda was changed. It just says approval of the audit of the bills.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Page on the posting out here and on the website.
Okay, that's fine.
Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So all those in favor of this approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is passed. So we already did the proclamation, and we are moving on to agreements. Request for increased Developer Finance Tax Incremental District 3 Assistance for Middleton Center Phase 1.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Okay, it needs one correction that, I don't know whether it's a correction or not. If you were to read this on amendment to the development agreement, it says agree to increase phase 2 principal. It's phase 1, not phase 2. Right? It's not for phase.
No, I think this is referring back to the phase 1 agreement.
Okay, so
That this is changing the terms of that agreement to reflect the increased cost borne by the developer and the qualification for the developer finance TIF for those for the additional development.
yeah, the phase 2 we already approved.
Right,
That was
but this
approved
is
a while
phase
ago.
1. This is phase 1.
So that's why this should be phase 1 rather than phase 2 here.
Where?
Yeah, it's
On the title page, right? In the
okay,
first
go to
paragraph.
the amendment to the development agreement, and the amendment says phase 1 principal amount.
Right.
Original phase 1 principal amount under the development agreement was 2.7 million. Due to the number of factors, the city has agreed to increase the phase 2 principal.
You are right that the change would be in
Phase 1.
paragraph 2A, line 3.
But it's also in the header page, the header paragraph, right? It also references Middleton Center Phase 2 LLC.
Well, it references both phase 1 and phase 2 if I'm
Yeah.
reading it
Yeah,
correctly.
so it needs to.
That's just listing who the parties are, I think.
If I may, in the signature page, it has signatures for Uptown Middleton LLC, which is the collective entity, Middleton Center Phase 1 and Middleton Center Phase 2. And I think the intent is that all of those legal entities are party to this agreement because the original agreement addressed all 3 phases. So we now have 2 LLCs, Phase 1 and Phase 2, actually 3 LLCs, and also Uptown Middleton LLC.
So I think if the motion has been made to approve it, we ought to move to amend to strike 2 and replace it with 1 in the third line of section 2A.
Okay, so all right, so whoever makes the motion, is that okay with you?
I think Bill was
I think-
advocating that you leave it as is because the agreement has built on itself.
No, you can't. I mean, it's one.
It's a clear mistake. It all refers to phase 1 except for.
Okay, yeah. You see where you're at.
Yeah. Thank you.
Not in the initial.
No.
I have a couple questions. Sorry to get into the weeds here, Bill. When we talk about effective gross income for actual EGI, why are we giving an allowance for vacancy on actual EGI?
We're basing the calculations on the pro forma that was provided by the developer in the initial calculations, and then we're using the same method so that we're comparing both what the initial proposed is to what the actual would be. So what the actual would be when we do the look back would be the stabilized allowance for vacancy. And that's.
But why would you put that on an actual calculation?
Because you would anticipate that even.
No, but it doesn't have any bearing on what your actual results are. I understand from a pro forma perspective, you want that in there, right? Because you're trying to normalize those things.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about actual results, you don't have a vacancy factor in there because it's not part of net income. Right? So I think that needs to be taken out or at least clarified on your calculations that says that the actual EGI does not include a vacancy allowance.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I did work with the city assessor in putting together the information for this section. So I guess that's something I would like to discuss with Paul of how he would recommend we look at that. And although he won't be the assessor at that time, I think he was involved in the review of this. So I would like to have the opportunity to discuss that with him.
Okay? I just
Yeah.
need to clarify that from a calculation perspective. The other issue I have is I'm a bit concerned about, it looks like paragraph 3B, in terms of why we would give up any rights to say, these are our calculations, take them or leave them, right? We're the ones giving the money. So it seems to me that this is really, there are calculations, and they're not really up for the developer to challenge. So I'm wondering why we want that, essentially, a point of a future point of potential contention when there are calculations, right? I don't mind if the developer helps you or gives you guidance or suggestions on how it should be, but that calculation belongs to the city. It doesn't belong to the developer, and it should be our determination on what that is. So I'd like to understand that whole thought process and why there's a arbitration clause in here.
My understanding is that the developer wants to have the ability, if there's an interpretation question in the formula, to be able to have an opportunity to discuss that or potentially have that go to a consultant that would do the arbitration as discussed here. The language that we base this on is based on examples that have been used in other communities and that Ehlers and Associates had worked in putting together with other communities. So I think this is fairly common language where look-back clauses have been used in Wisconsin. We did discuss and go back and forth with the developer on there, and I think they wanted to have some type of ability that, you know, we can't just give them a number and they don't have any ability to question or challenge how we're interpreting the inputs going into that calculation.
I would
agree
argue
it's
that
the
they have a
city's
choice. They can
calculation.
take the money and live with our calculations, right?
Mhm.
They're taking the money, it's our calculation. I don't see why we would present an opportunity for the developer to dispute all this and take us to arbitration. I would make the motion that we not have that clause in there, and something to the effect that some kind of language that says the calculation belongs to the city and it is the city's decision as to what it is. I'm ambivalent as to whether you get help from the developer on how to calculate that, but at the end of the day, it's the city's calculation.
But they're based on all the data provided by the developer, right? It's not, I mean, we can't really pull it out of the hat. It will be based on the information given to us. Is that true, Bill?
Yeah, in paragraph A under section 3
Mhm.
requires that the developer provide financial information that has been prepared by an independent CPA,
Mhm.
and then the city has the ability that if we need additional documentation and supporting information, we have the ability to request that. But ultimately they will be providing the actual numbers at the time of the look back. The city has the ability to request supporting documentation if there's a question, and then the city would be performing the calculation as described in the document.
Okay.
I'd much rather prefer that if there's a dispute, that you contract with our auditors as opposed to going to binding arbitration. It just seems to me that
I personally don't have a problem with that. I mean, I agree that would give the city more flexibility. I don't know if that will be an issue for the developer.
as I said, the developer does not have to take the money. If they object to the terms, they don't have to take the money. So I'll make the motion that we or make is it supplementary or complementary?
Amending.
I'll amend the motion that we strike paragraph 3 and put language in there, 3B, that essentially gives the city the unilateral right to determine what that calculation is, And if it's challenged, that we have an opportunity to go to the city's own auditors for verification of your calculations.
Okay, so need a second for this part?
I'll second that motion, or that amendment.
We didn't do the
Okay.
amendment for 2A yet either, so can we do them together, Mark?
Okay, 2A, we absolutely need to do it, so.
So I'll make that motion as
With
well.
your
the-
motion.
And I will second.
It's phase
Yeah.
one.
Emily, you had some questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if we had a previous contract that someone was writing that in, if this is a new precedent, that this was new language that you've never seen before, or if this is language that's been used in our city in the past.
We've never done this type of agreement before.
Okay.
So this is all new for the city, right? All this look-back stuff is something that's new. It's a new way to look at a TIP agreement.
I understand
Which I don't
that.
have a problem with, but I think that we need to understand that this is our decision. It's not, right? And we're making this offer. It's not a right of the developer to take the money.
Understood. I was just making sure because he talked about other communities having used this language, and I just want to make
Well,
sure.
he was using that as an example that there is this, other TIF agreements have language similar to this that they've used to incorporate into this agreement.
Thank
So,
you.
Larry, where do you stand?
This is a policy issue, it's not a legal issue. It's up to the council to decide what it wants to do with this matter.
So what's your experience with this other municipalities?
I personally have never done a clawback agreement before. This kind of negotiation is common between the parties in developing the contract language. I can see both sides, and I'm not going to, I mean, this is a council decision, it's not an
Okay.
attorney decision.
Yeah, yes, Mike.
I just wanted to clarify, Mayor, Bill works with Ellers and has worked with Ellers and Associates, but you may not know who they are. They are a financial advisor for many cities around the state. And so when he said that Ellers and Associates provided that information to us, I just wanted to give you background for that. It's not coming out of thin air. It's a group that has worked primarily for municipalities all over the state. Right?
So what's your experience with this in Verona or Sun Prairie or any of the other places?
I personally have not had an agreement that has had a look back in this format in another community. In looking at this concept, when we wanted to do a look back, I'm familiar with them and knew that Ellers and Associates had worked with these in several communities. I asked them for several example agreements, and then based on that example, working with the city assessor and with Matt Fleming, we crafted the language and negotiated that with the developer. On the point about the arbitration, just to make it clear, I have no problem with removing that section. As I said, I think that does provide more options for the city. However, that would be a potentially substantial change for the developer. I understand the point that they're at the point that they're asking for additional TIF assistance, and if they don't, agree to the city's terms, that's the policy direction from the council.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Comments? Okay, the motion is to approve the request for increased developer finance tax incremental district
Vote
3.
on the amendment first.
Vote on isn't that part of the amendment?
No, we always vote the amendments up or down before we go to approve the agreement.
Okay, all right. All those in favor of the amendment say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? So the amendment passes, which is
The amendment was to replace
section.
B with the city's auditors for the review, right?
If required, if requested, yeah. Right. The calculation belongs to the city, and if the developer disputes the calculation, then the city has a right to go to its auditor for confirmation.
Our attorney to draft language
Somewhere,
utilizing
right.
our auditors in a new subsection B.
Okay,
And just also don't forget 2A was going to be fixed at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, so now on to the main motion, request for increased developer financed tax incremental District 3 assistance for Middleton Senior Center Phase 1. Middleton Center Phase 1.
Could I just, we're still haven't, the question about the EGI, for the actual EGI, how are you gonna handle that? Are you gonna get that resolved as an amendment, or as part of this amendment, or is that a separate amendment, or is you're just gonna assume that it's?
Well, if the council's comfortable with that, if that's something that I can discuss with the city assessor and then work with the city attorney on making an adjustment to that section. I'm assuming based on the previously approved amendment that this is going to be subject to final city attorney approval because we'll have to do the language in 3B. So we could include this as part of that if you're comfortable with that.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
That's fine.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, all those in favor of this motion to approve the PIF assistance for Middleton Center Phase 1, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Next one is the award of bid quote for professional services, and the first one was proposal from MSA Professional Services for design work related to replacement of the Milton Hills Boardwalk.
Move approval as recommended by Conservancy Lands Commission.
Second.
Okay, any questions or discussion? Now, Susan, this is going to be paved path, right?
This is what
Well,
Matt can explain it better.
Staff have looked at options to improve or replace the existing boardwalk and make the path a more sustainable, maintenance-friendly. We're presuming mostly asphalt. There may be some portions of boardwalk. The key consideration here is that we don't want to do anything that negatively impacts the function of the pond system at Middleton Hills, because it is functioning extremely well. And as we look at making this improvement, and that's why MSA is involved, they're doing the stormwater design work related to the pond, and we want to just ensure cooperation between our plans and stormwater plans to ensure the proper functioning of the pond system.
any questions for Matt or any other questions? Otherwise, all those in favor of this motion to award this bid to MSA, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. The next one is the easement. And this is the acceptance of easement for public bicycle way and sidewalk at 6240, 6280 Sanctuary Avenue.
And before you take action on that, there is a resolution that has been prepared.
Yep.
So that the action would be to approve the resolution, not to approve the easement. Very technical because the resolution approves the easement.
So the motion would be to approve the resolution number 2018-31.
Correct.
Which is at the place, at your place, so need a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Any questions or any discussion?
I have a question for the city attorney.
Mhm.
Did the easement language that is part, I guess, of this resolution, did that change at all since we reviewed the packet over the weekend?
No.
So it really is just the addition of this resolution which incorporates
That's
all
correct.
of the terms and conditions of the easement?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Not the one in the packet, but the one that I emailed to you, I think, that Friday afternoon, Monday morning.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Now can I ask you, or anybody who can answer, are there things that you can point out that are different from what was printed Friday afternoon for the hard copy packets versus what was sent electronically? Because scanning through it, I was unable to necessarily point to the differences between the two versions.
Larry, did you by chance bring the red line version with you?
I did not, I'm sorry.
Well, I did look at the red line version, so there was essentially And the developer was interested that if the city messes up when they're building that, the bike path, they clean it up. And if they do anything with the utilities or anything, so if they damage the utility, that is city's responsibility to fix it too. So they're just those two things, I think, which would be common thing to ask, so.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I also at home couldn't read it, and then Mike sent me the red line version, so.
I feel like I have enough information for this evening.
It was, they're giving the land. They wanted not to be getting stuck with some other stuff.
Yeah, our attorney didn't have any problem with their attorney's request with that additional.
No, it was very minor thing, so.
I believe in the idea of trust but verify, so thank you for providing additional information.
Okay, so I guess the motion was made and seconded. Any other discussion? Otherwise, all those in favor of the motion, which is resolution 2018-31, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the resolution 2018-31 passes. Miscellaneous. Proposal to add weeknight option at the Middleton Recycling Center. Abby, you want to say anything, or you guys are happy with the information she has provided?
I'd move approval.
Second.
Okay, any questions, any discussion?
Only question I have is this year, it is it's cost neutral. It sounds like there's enough in the budget to handle it this year. Do we then expect a little bit of it? Well, I suppose we don't have to continue this on into next year if we find there's a budget increase.
We expect that we would be okay in future years as well. We know we'll be okay this year. We originally budgeted for a little more than 10 hours per week for the recycling center coordinator, and he's working, I think, between 6 and 7 hours a week. So presumably if we add the weeknight option and it's 2 hours, then we add an additional hour for other duties, opening, closing, and then, additional coordination, we would be okay in future years. But what we're proposing now is that we just go with the rest of this year as a pilot to see what the demand and interest is, and also to see if it helps to alleviate some of the pressure that is on Saturday mornings right now, because it's getting pretty backed up at the recycling center. And Bradley, our recycling coordinator, has mentioned a couple of times that it would be nice to have an additional staff person. We don't have the budget for that year round, but we thought we could maybe try to solve two issues. One, Saturday morning doesn't work for everyone, so we do get questions occasionally about adding a weeknight, and two, to help alleviate the pressure on Saturday mornings.
Will File 13 have to do a locked dumpster now because of this? Because they're not going to come Wednesday night too, are they?
I don't know if they would have to do a locked dumpster or if we would just have to prevent entry into the recycling center from anyone other than staff. So Wednesday to Saturday, if we have computers stored in there, we wouldn't want anybody coming in and out of the recycling center.
Right.
But yeah, I could check into that. I'm not sure.
But wouldn't, coming twice a week is too much.
Yeah, we just need to make sure that File 13 can meet the requirements of the e-steward certification through the Wisconsin DNR, and I know that's where the locked electronics came into place. So I can check in and see.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, either to Abby or anyone else? Okay, otherwise, all those in favor of the proposal to add weeknight option at the Middleton Recycling Center, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. The next one is again Abby Singh Art Walk Middleton proposal. Actually, Emily, just yesterday you were exposed to this stuff in Ohio, right? So original idea came from Emily for one of the listening sessions last year. So.
Yeah, the mayor asked for ideas from the business community, and I shared that it really helped me as a community resident go to businesses I wouldn't generally go into. And then I returned because they had cool stuff. And then later on, I was asked to be an artist and show my artwork.
Wow.
So, because most people in the community didn't know I did art. And so it was a way for me to be like more known in the community as an artist and share back with kids and with inspire other artists. So I asked the mayor if he would consider something like this, and Abby and the art committee did a phenomenal job over the last 8 months or so, creating a committee and coming up with ideas and how to adapt it for the local scene, and they compared it to other communities like Stoughton. They did a really great job researching, and they're pairing artists and businesses right now actively, and I look forward to the event.
Awesome.
Not this year, though. Not full event.
Yeah,
Sure.
great job. So need a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
I will second.
Yeah, so Abby, do you want to explain pop-up?
So once we met with the Stoughton folks and did some research using our public arts intern, Sarah Bluvis, who is gone now, she took a full-time job, we realized that we didn't have the capacity to do a full event this year, but there was still interest in trying to hand select 5 or 6 downtown businesses to do a pop-up. And so the idea is we would tag on to the Strollin Middleton Jazz Festival. I had a meeting with the Jazz Festival coordinators, and they're totally on board and love the idea. Their event is Friday, September 7th, and they have 8 venues in downtown where they're going to have live music. We would select, about 5 businesses that are not competing, so different businesses, right around Parmenter, Hubbard, and Elmwood. So we've already got a lot of businesses that are interested. Van Nutt sent out an email to his chamber listserv and mentioned the art walk, and so I've been getting emails from businesses that want to participate, but we're trying to keep it really small this year, just as a kind of pilot event. Next year will be the larger event.
All right, any question to Abby or anyone else? Okay, all those in favor of this motion for the art walk Middleton proposal, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. The next one is the accession policy revision for decency language. Start with one of the art piece on, I guess it's on one of the Middleton streets. So
This came about because we received a complaint from someone about a piece of public art that we have in the city. And the complainant specifically asked for a written response from the Public Arts Committee. The Arts Committee realized that while they have an accessions policy for public art, they don't really have any. He specifically asked that the sculpture be de-accessioned because he felt that it was inappropriate, indecent. And so based on that, when the Public Arts Committee was reviewing the complaint, they realized that they didn't really have a formal policy for de-accessioning public art, and so they responded with a very nice written letter saying, we've reviewed your complaint. We do not feel that the sculpture is indecent. However, we will look into a de-accessions policy for the city because we don't have a policy in place now, and this is the first complaint that we've ever received about public art in the city. So that was the impetus for this.
Is this draft based on any other cities deaccessioning?
Yep. We looked at quite a few examples, probably 10 to 12. And then we really tried to boil it down and keep it pretty simple because our public art program, we don't have a lot of pieces in our collection, and it's not as robust as some of the other communities that have. Right. I mean, one of the communities we looked at was San Francisco, so obviously they have a lot more in their collection. So we tried to just kind of simplify it and have it kind of mirror the language from the accessions policy.
Well, I had a question on the timing where it says that the city-owned art must have been on display for many years. If it's unsafe and it hasn't been installed for many years, I just think I don't know how to interpret that it has to be up if it's...
I think the goal with that is that a lot of times when a piece of public art is initially installed, it has a negative reaction because people have different opinions about artwork.
Right.
And so the goal was that, we don't want to be reviewing a complaint a month after the sculpture was installed, because as people get used to it and embrace it, in a couple years it might be the most fabulous thing that everyone in the city loves. So that was the goal.
Okay.
But I suppose if it were a safety concern, I'm guessing we might actually have other city ordinances that would come into play there, like the nuisance ordinance and possibly even the building code.
Many years is kind of up for interpretation. Like 2 years?
Sure, yeah, that would be fine. Be willing to accept that change.
We did debate that as well as part of the Arts Committee. And overall, the committee favored many, because I was trying to get them to say 5 to 10 or a specific number, and they actually said they had spent a good long time staying away from a specific number. So, you know.
See, I would argue that it's too ambiguous because many could mean many different number of time periods depending on who you are. So it would be, from a clarification and policy perspective, it would be better to delineate the number of years if that's what you want, or just say, you know, well, it would be better from a policy perspective to delineate the number of years. That also is the same issue with, I guess, bullet point number 2, that the period of the public reaction over a period of many years, right? It's better from a policy perspective to quantify it so that there's no ambiguity on that. And then I just wanted to add paragraph 3 there. Doesn't make any sense to me because the work wouldn't be there if the Arts Committee had originally decided it had little or no aesthetic value to the community.
I think the thought was that the Arts Committee changes.
Well, but that's the point, is that you don't want the recency of committee appointments to factor into this.
Okay. Could I take it back to them? And
That's what my motion
Yeah,
is,
okay.
is to refer it back to the Arts Committee to make these clarifications.
Okay, that's your motion?
Just,
Sue?
Yes.
I would just like to add, I think it's a good idea to have a deaccession policy. I just think this one needs more work.
That's why it should go back to Art.
And there's nothing urgent about it.
I'll second that if no one has.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Otherwise, all those in favor of this motion to send it back to the Art Committee, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes unanimously. All right, we are on to the ordinances. This is second reading. Ordinance to amend various parking restrictions on Deming Way.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, any questions, any comments? All those in favor of this motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. This is again second reading ordinance to create an ethics board in the city of Middleton.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments?
I have
Yes.
question on just a word choice more than anything else. Under, let's see if I can, it's on the first page, under 2.33 Board of Ethics 1B, under composition, it says, terms of office for non-council members shall be 3 years. The city public official or public employee member shall be appointed for a staggered 3-year term or the duration of that person's employment. My question is, with a single person, who I believe there's only one person who is the city public official or public employee, how do you do a staggered 3-year term for a single person? I guess I would propose that the word staggered be struck because I don't think it really applies in this case.
Larry?
I'm just counting people, and I think that point makes good sense.
So that would be my amendment, would be to strike the word staggered from section, again, under Board of Ethics, section 1B.
Okay. Yes, Mike?
And Mayor, I had a question. I know the L&O committee reviewed this and made several changes. In advisory opinions, H, it reads that any questions as to the interpretation of any provisions of this Code of Ethics chapter shall be referred to the city attorney. All right, and I mentioned this when it first came up a few months ago. For years, I have been, with my experience interpreting the ethics code, and when I had serious questions, sending them on to the city attorney. So what this means, as I read it, is that if I get any questions to me, as I have in the past, probably, one a week, any questions then should be referred immediately to the city attorney without my attempting to address it. And that's the way I read this now. And I want to make sure that you're comfortable with that.
I am
Yeah,
not.
are you referring to I?
H, advisory opinions.
I was confused too, Larry. It's the H that's on the very first page.
Oh.
Under, I know, there's a second H later on in the document.
Why is that one H?
I think
advisory
it's
opinions.
well,
Right under section 1.
it's referring. The reason it's an H here is it's referencing, as I understand it, it's referencing something elsewhere.
But Mike, it's the interpretation, not
2.20 is the city ethics code.
Okay.
Interpretations of the code.
not any complaint.
It's not what it says. It says any questions as
To the interpretation.
Oh, yeah, okay, it does say ethics code, but that's what I'm saying. I have been interpreting that for many years. So if the intent is that I just transfer any of those questions to the city attorney, we can do
Yes.
that.
That's the intent.
I think it's needless, but if that's your intent, I just want to make sure that that's what you intend.
It says any questions. Whose questions are they? Are they the person who's making the question to my?
It's not a complaint. It's any questions
Inquiry or,
about the ordinance.
Yeah.
So oftentimes
person
we
being
interpret
accused.
ordinances on a regular basis without going to the city attorney.
So this will actually,
I think some of this is to protect the person being accused, to be sure they're getting fair representation.
Well, that's a complaint, though. If that
Oh,
section
but
is related
interpretations
to a,
of the code, I think, still needs to be done by the city attorney.
I guess I would like to ask the question, how often, you're saying that this happens more frequently than maybe we think? Is there a way to...
right, staff will typically come up and ask me about a provision in the ethics code, and I will respond. And
That's different.
I would say 95% of the time, I don't refer that to the city attorney, but there's some that are stumpers that I do.
This is in response to complaints about people. Then those questions need to go to the city attorney. So for example, if someone has complained about a council member, and that council member has questions about the interpretation of the ethics code, I think they would want that to go to the city attorney for interpretation.
so if somebody just asking, could I go to some party by the developer or something, that wouldn't change, Mike, right? I mean, like, sometime I ask you some of those questions.
Right, and I oftentimes will send you a note, that you've been invited to this party by a developer, and then provide some input. Most recently, I had Matt Fleming provide an advisory opinion on that. But occasionally, I will just field those questions. So I think what Susan's saying, what I heard her saying is that the angle is if there's a complaint about someone.
Yeah, because this is the ethics board that will be reviewing complaints about city employees or council members or so, committee members.
Maybe the context of the rest of that section, which isn't here, is what that's about. I don't know because we don't have the rest of
We don't have all of the ethics.
2.206H in front of us.
Correct.
Or 2.206. This is subsection H.
Where do you stand, Larry?
I would only point out that that is the existing ordinance. We're not changing the practice at all.
It is what we have now, Mike, so.
You have it in front of you? Yeah, this is the existing ordinance.
The only thing that's being changed is the advisory requests and opinions and referral to the Board of Ethics. Otherwise, it's the same as it has been.
Any other questions while they are looking at it?
I assume, worst case scenario, if we find that there is something else in section 2.20 subsection 6 that causes us problems in the future, we would just come back and
We can change it.
fix it at that time.
But I think we want to make it clear that whoever is being accused does have a right to get a legal opinion from an attorney.
And I agree, and I think we're all in agreement on there. I think the problem is right now Mike has an interpretation that this was any time that anybody, even internal staff, just says, what do we mean about this? Well, I can't answer that. Got to go to the city attorney.
That's
I don't think
what
that's
was-
the intent.
But
And
that's
that
it.
was in the previous ethics, code of ethics.
Sure, and just we're looking at this without all of the background.
So that's a question, that's not a complaint. So
It's-
I
And
guess
we're also looking at this now in the lights of a complaint, in light of a complaint
Agreed.
board. So it's kind of changed the focus from just, hey, Mike, can we do this? Or to, at this point, there's an actual firm complaint.
Yeah, this is for an ethics board to investigate complaints. It's not our original code of ethics.
Are you okay with that, Mike? You can still answer the staff questions. It's only when there's any complaint. Then you ask Larry or whoever.
Yeah. I think that H refers back to, well, it's just it looks like it's a section all by itself.
It's just, yeah, it's just the advisory opinions. I mean,
So that's the context in which I'm bringing that up. If
I'm-
that's
I'm
what
trying to remember, but isn't the ethics ordinance in its whole section 220 sub 6 rather than section 2.20?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I thought.
So this is a separate subsection without context related to any of the others.
Well, the language is taken from the state statute. And there's no problem with changing it because this is a matter of local law. But whenever this ordinance was written, the existing ethics code, they basically copied the 19.35, which deals with local ethics boards.
Okay, so.
So from a practical standpoint, Larry, then does having this language preclude Mike from answering these questions?
No.
That he says that he gets on a regular basis?
If you can be sure that I will never have a turf war with Mike over things he does. If he wants to do it and it's good for the order, I don't see any problem in doing so.
Okay, so
Believe me, if I have any doubts, my first question would be to Larry and Matt, and it's just that there's so many of them that are fairly easy to answer.
okay, we will let you work it out. So
And I think that, Ellen, our focus was that
This is
Susan said
creating
if
the ethics board.
somebody had a complaint against them, that they could ask for an advisory opinion from the city attorney.
Right, and that I see as a distinctly different
Right.
element of the ethics code and the ethics board. If there's a complaint about someone, then that needs due process as laid out in the ordinance.
and this is dealing with complaints. So. Okay, so motion has been made, seconded, and
Well, again, just
Yes.
since we're talking about an ordinance here, we probably ought to have a formal motion to amend
The staggered?
2.33 sub 1 sub B to eliminate the word staggered, and then let's.
Okay,
take
so
it
need a
from there.
motion to remove the word staggered.
I'll make that motion.
Need a
Second.
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 Okay, any discussion? All those in favor of the motion to remove the word staggered from, you will write down where it is, under H. Where is it, so? Okay, Bill, you have that, where that word is, to remove the word staggered, right?
Up
Okay.
from 1B.
Okay, 1B. Okay, all those in favor of this motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So now we are on to the main motion. All those in favor of approving the ordinance to create the ethic board for the city of Middleton say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So the motion passes. Now we are on to, there have been some people waiting here and sitting here, the recommendation and proposals. The first one is the request for proposal for Parmenter Street, Clark Street properties.
Move approval.
Second.
Any questions, any comments? Otherwise, all those in favor of this motion say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Now the request by Ellison Construction for tax increment to District 3 assistance for Whispering Pines condominium, Pleasant View Road.
Move approval as recommended by Plan.
Land Commission. Mhm. Okay, need a second?
I'll second it since it's also supported by workforce housing.
All right. Okay, any questions? Yes, Mark?
I had a question.
Yes.
Our esteemed colleague, Mr. Teal, brought up the fact that it seemed a bit strange for the city to be giving the use of stormwater, or giving use of city land for a private party's stormwater retention pond. And I think if I can synthesize what his argument was that he felt that the developer should pay the city for the use of that land or buy the land outright. So in that vein, I'm questioning why in the new amended TIF agreement, we are giving the developer money for which to pay us back for the use of that land. So somebody that could explain to me why we're doing that.
Yes. The TIF, and we've used TIF for stormwater in the past when there's an impediment or a limiting factor to the development, and therefore the tax increment, and that's the case here. And in that, if they had to put, because of the percolation of the soils on the site, which was not known to them at the time of the purchase of the property, the lack of percolation, because the stormwater regulations changed in 2007 countywide as well as in Middleton, and those factors affected their ability to have the development, even limited, that they're seeking now. Then to have the stormwater on site would limit the tax increment value or the value of the development in total. So by having the stormwater on property that the city would not otherwise be using, the concept is then there will be more tax increment that flows. They will be able to build all of the buildings that have been laid out in their concept plan. So it's, I think one of those buildings would be jeopardized if the stormwater were to be on site. Also to be jeopardized would be an access for the emergency access to Evergreen Road. So in that sense, it's a classic but-for test for TIF. You know, but for the stormwater to be moved off-site, would there be as much development or tax increment to the property, and therefore also the workforce housing units as well?
So
and
they
you know,
are,
one of the things I want to emphasize on this is that this developer is the only one I know that's building affordable homes for sale to people at 80% or less of median income. And the value of that is that when we're hearing and seeing evidence that average home prices are around $300,000, that we have a developer building condos for sale that are closer to, correct me if I'm wrong, I think about $190,000. $190,000. They don't have all the amenities that some apartment complexes do, and that's what the developer said in the narrative as well. But for a lot of folks, being able to get into Middleton and build equity in a condominium, having the ability then to advance further along means a lot. And so I think for workforce housing, it's more than multifamily rentals. It's also home ownership. We've really struggled for many years to find ways in which to incentivize home ownership on that level. We tried for many years the down payment assistance program, and we had some success with that, but it was limited and it was very labor intensive in putting that together.
Mike, but giving the developer the land for the stormwater and we're not selling it to them, in essence. And then we're building through TIF the stormwater detention basin?
It'd be a transfer from TIF to the city's general fund.
Okay.
Where do you stand, Larry?
This is a policy issue. Obviously, I stated my opposition to giving the land. And at this point, we are not giving the land away. I do not know how the figure of $25,000 was established, but the idea is, again, that the TID number 3 fund will write a check to the general fund, right, so that they are separate legal entities. So the general fund will be richer and the TID 3 fund will have made an investment in a project.
Yeah, what we did I did, was to extrapolate the unimproved value of other land in that area, or, excuse me, on the phase 1 condos, the unimproved portion, not the building portion of that property, and then extrapolate that to this phase. And that's where we came up with the value.
Okay.
Susan, you have some questions, Dan?
Can I ask one more question of Mike?
Okay.
Because it was unclear to me on Bill's table. Are we talking about sale of the land, lease of the land, an easement on the land? It does not say. It just says we will. It talks about use of the land. So what are we talking about? I suppose we could put that.
Well, it says under city finance TIP projects, payment to city general fund for use of property for stormwater purposes.
Yeah, use. So is this intended to be an easement, or are we selling the land?
Yes, Ron, you
selling
can.
it in fee.
Okay.
Okay, Ron is going. He's the attorney, and he's going to clarify what.
Sorry about that. Under the tables that we prepared, we have land acquisition on that amount. So we assumed we were acquiring it in fee. Now, if we only get an easement over it to discharge our water, that's a legal technical difference, but the practical matter is we're still putting the stormwater on the land. So, and I understand Mr. Beckler will be preparing a contract on this, and I assume that issue will be addressed in the contract. But I said we thought we were buying it in fee. Again, if we were only buying an easement over it in perpetuity, I don't know what the practical difference is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, any other questions? So this is the start, so you're going to work
Yeah,
detail.
if this is approved, we would then do as we usually do and develop a development agreement between the city and the entity is here. part of Whispering Pines. I just don't know
Yes.
what the name of the entity is, but yeah, that's what we would do.
We'd also have a separate agreement with the cemetery in the town for access to Evergreen Road. And we haven't really talked about that a lot, but for that emergency access, the only practical way to derive that was to take it to Evergreen Road. And there's barriers from the landscape to take it anywhere else on that property. Evergreen's the shortest distance, and it's the flattest distance, and the town already has an access granted to the cemetery. So rather than seeking a second access to Evergreen Road, which we think would complicate matters with the town, going through the cemetery, not over the graves, but on the access drive that the cemetery has. And Greg Held, who is the formerly on the town board, wants to ensure that the cemetery is getting value for that. So he is seeking $3,000 a year plus an inflationary escalator for that use of the property for access. He insists that it be an agreement with the city and not with a developer or a property owner. And frankly, if I were in his position, I would probably advocate the same, simply because the city is always here and property owners, developers come and go. So the concept that we have discussed is that TIF would pay that through 2030, and then the property owners would be assessed for that by the city as an ongoing cost into the future. So the city would no longer be carrying that. TIF is done in 2030, and then the property owners would be assessed. And the Ellisons had no problem in agreeing with that.
So carry on with that thought, right? What happens to the easement or the payment for the easement for stormwater after 2030?
Well, it's payment in fee, so it would be, like Ron Trachtenberg said, they would acquire the land from the city. The emergency access would be an easement.
So the stormwater pond or the stormwater is a sale of property.
Right.
Okay. So then I really do have an issue with this. It just seems a bit disingenuous that the city is paying the developer in order to pay us back for this. So I don't support that at all. Bill, normally when we see these TIF financials, you're disclosing total costs and what the normal costs are and what TIF eligible costs are. I don't see them on the stuff in the paper in our packet. Is there a distinction between normal costs and TIF eligible costs for this project?
Yeah. This is a little bit different than most TIF projects, but because the model has been home sales, and right now, because of the way condos appraise, they aren't able to sell units as they had in the past. We talked about this quite a bit at the workforce housing and the difficulty in the bank financing market for that. So for the foreseeable future, they would be renting these with hopes and plans to sell the units because they're built as condominiums, or built as condominiums then that can be rented. And Michael, if I'm not explaining this and you would like to add, please feel, or you and Ron.
Well, how does that relate to cost, right?
The cost,
right, so normally in a TIF agreement,
incentive for affordable housing?
No, I'm just talking about extraordinary site costs, owner and tenant safety, and workforce housing. I understand there's no normal cost for workforce, but normally we would see a total cost for extraordinary site costs for the bioretention pond, for the existing retaining walls, what the normal cost was, and what the TIF eligible cost.
Oh, the marginal cost you're talking about, yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. That's on page
Exhibit
12.
C.
Exhibit B.
B.
That's
B
interesting.
also.
Yeah, Exhibit
Yep,
B.
yep.
My copy, it's on Exhibit C, it's page 57 of the plan.
Except it doesn't show.
There are columns for total cost, normal cost, development.
Sheet. Developer sheet is on page 60.
Yeah, the developer's sheet is page 64, and that shows the item. And the marginal cost of spreading cost over fewer units. Then the bioretention marginal cost of poor soil resulting in an additional 2,559 square feet of bioretention pond needed. So then those numbers are factored into the pro forma, going back to Bill's on page 57.
So Mike, did our consultant also check these costs and that they were eligible? You know,
Tom Stetzer of Strand did
Yeah.
check the soils on the site
okay.
and reviewed the work that was done by the architect for the developer.
Now, Susan, you had a question and then
Yeah,
Mark.
I've got questions on terms of the stormwater pond. For an average developer, and the one that I know best, it would be Middleton Hills, Inc., when they built that neighborhood. They dedicated stormwater facility to the city and built it. And now that is part of the city's responsibility to take care of. Is this going to be the same way, or are they going to be taking care of it like the Conservancy Ponds or Condos stormwater facility, where that condominium complex has
That's
to
a
pay
very
for
good
it?
question, and I believe that's the latter is the case.
Feel better if that's the case,
Yeah, it's
because
a smaller development, and that's typical that we have a stormwater maintenance agreement that runs with the land.
Because if we're giving, or in essence, with this TIF money, buying our own land and giving it to them for a stormwater problem, I have a problem then with us being in the future responsible for maintaining it.
That would be the developer's responsibility. It would be on their land, and then they would be responsible for stormwater maintenance.
In the future, after they've sold, would it be the homeowners after they've sold all those units?
Homeowners Association typically.
Ron Trachtenberg again. Short answer is yes. The pond will be privately maintained by the condominium association.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron. Mark, you still have some questions?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand how, if the cost for a high retention pond is 104, how is there incremental cost because you have less units?
The incremental cost is because of basically some site issues. The detention pond, the retaining wall, the sidewalk, and the additional need for the additional land for additional retention pond or detention pond. That's additional cost. Over that, another issue that has arisen, we've had to lower the number of units. Now, what that does is pushes up the cost on a per unit basis.
So we're not talking about cost per unit. We're talking about in gross, your expense to build these retention ponds is not changing because of the number of units.
That's correct.
Right, so again, I want to...
But the issue that the but-for test comes in the issue of being able to provide affordable housing. If we could take that cost and portion it over all the units, it would drive up the price of all the units. Some would be market, some wouldn't. And it would drive up the price of the affordable units, taking them out of the affordable range. That's what the issue came up. But we're asking for is a TIF to cover the extraordinary costs.
So in this case, without the bioretention pond, you wouldn't be able to build this. Is that
Without the retention pond, without the, what do you call it, the wall, the retaining wall, without the additional land? The short answer is no.
That's my question, is what is the total cost of putting these additional features in?
Mike, do you have that?
161? Or is it something higher than that?
No,
Or
it would
what
be
is
that
the normal
161.
cost? Pardon me?
161, like you just said.
So then what is the normal cost for these things?
Well, I guess it's because the pond got larger.
Okay. Again, this is not hard. What's the total cost of building the pond as you want it? What's the cost of building a pond that doesn't have to meet these issues, right? So the TIF eligible expense is the differential. It's not the whole cost of the pond.
It can be the whole cost of the pond if without being able to put in the pond, the project's not feasible.
So the cost
So
will be
starting, if you're doing a project from day one, okay? And suppose, notwithstanding whatever and you find out what the pond needs to be on day one, and it costs so many dollars to build the pond in day one, and you need that money to build the pond in day one to make the project feasible, that would be a TIF eligible expense. So it's not necessarily just the marginal cost.
I think one way to address your question, Mark, would be to have Tom Stetzer put a memo together reviewing those costs to determine and put it in writing what we've been doing as a practice lately. What is the marginal cost of that? So
I agree.
If you approve this in concept, then what we would do is have the attorney draft the agreements, bring it back with that memo from Strand to verify the marginal cost.
Actually, I'd make a motion that we just defer this until we get that. I don't want to even approve this conceptually. I think there's big financial issues here that are unresolved, and policy issues here that are unresolved. So I'd prefer that we just defer it until we can get the language from Tom and get some better clarification on the TIF numbers.
What are the policy issues, Mark?
Why the city is paying a developer to pay us back for the land. That's a big issue for me.
Could I just address that one little issue? We need additional land. If we bought it from Mrs. Smith and used the TIF money to buy the land from Mrs. Smith, it's not different than using the TIF money to buy it from the city. There's really no difference in that regard. It is a cost of the project.
I understand
It's
that.
whether it's out of your left hand pocket
I
or your
understand,
right pocket.
but I
It's a
understand.
cost of the project.
And that's the issue, that the optics on this really look bad. Okay, I understand your point of view, but for the city to pay somebody to get paid back for something is just inherently wrong.
It's done all the time in TIF, sir. With all due respect, there's lots of projects where people buy land from the city and use TIF dollars to buy the land. And and what that basically does is drive down the cost of the land for the underlying project.
Okay, did you second it?
I'll second Mark's motion.
Okay. Any more questions? Are we ready to vote on this amended motion to defer? We vote on this one first, right? Okay, all those in favor of deferring this to some other time, say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed?
Aye.
So it's 3-3. No, it's
Oh, it was
4-2.
4-2.
4-2. Okay, well, so then we go to the main motion then.
No, it's deferred.
Oh, it is 4-2. Okay, all right. So we are done with this one then. So, well, I wish everyone here and at home happy 4th of July and need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, so we are adjourned. Thank you.
Next meeting, we'll try for that.